So the next major, ELEAGUE Boston, will be kicking off very soon as the initial stages will begin on January 12th. This is going to be a new system to the major, right? Now all 24 teams are technically a part of the major. We have the new challenger stage, which will be what kicks off the major, and then we'll have the new legend stage, and then the new champion stage. And obviously what's different here is the new challenger stage used to be what we considered the major qualifier. The new legend stage used to be what we consider just the group stage of the major itself, but there's now been some changes, and I've already done a little bit of coverage on the major. I did my preliminary Pick'Em challenge, which you can check out on the channel, and I've talked about a couple of the teams. Like I did a whole video on 100 Thieves, for example, when they made their lineup announcement. But I want to take a video just to kind of talk about all the teams representing the Americas in the major and kind of give you my take on where I think they stand and how well I think they might be able to do at this major. And I don't want to go into crazy deep detail because I have 6 teams I have to cover in this video, but I did want to just give you a little bit of something and maybe direct you to some of my other content that does go into deeper detail about some of these teams. And so when we look at this new system, essentially from the minor championships and runners-up, teams representing the Americas region in this will be Renegades, though they do come from, of course, the Asian minor, but they do have 2 North American players on their team. They play in the North American League, so I do still think that they somewhat represent the Americas in this major. So we'll go with Renegades, then we have Team Liquid, and then we have Misfits. Of course, Liquid and Misfits coming from the Americas minor itself. Then you have Cloud9, who is a current challenger who will already just be directly seeded into the new challenger stage, didn't have to play through a minor or anything like that. And so that makes 4 of the teams we're going to talk about. And then, of course, we have 100 Thieves and SK, who are 2 Legends teams who will be competing in the new Legends stage as current Legends and not have to go through the initial stage of the major. And so we'll kind of go in order of where these teams are already sitting. And so we're looking at Renegades. Obviously, this is a team I've already talked a little bit about, as well as Misfits. Both these teams we're about to talk about. So if you want to get deeper details about Renegades and Misfits, I'll put a link in the description below that talks about both these teams in finer detail, because both these teams represent, you know, a movement in the middle of the North American standings that are rising up now to start challenging teams like Liquid and Cloud9 and SK, some of the top teams competing in the North American region. And we've really seen that because of their recent results. So if we start with Renegades, you know, this is a team that obviously did go out in groups at IEM Oakland, but they still, you know, played some really good teams, and it's not as disappointing as it may seem. You know, they obviously were able to beat Optic. They competed really well against FaZe on Train, but did ultimately lose. They did get a map off of G2. They only lost to Team Liquid in overtime, and then they lost to Gambit, which is still proven to be a pretty strong team, even after the Krakow Major where they won it with Zeus and he the part of the Golden Navi. They still proven to still be kind of dangerous. So wasn't that disappointing. And then prior to that, they had a lot of success, obviously coming second at Power Masters, only losing to Cloud9, actually beat Cloud9 in the group stage, only lost them in the finals 0-2, and had beat Optic and had beat Luminosity. Then, of course, they won, you know, the SLI League in Shanghai, beating Virtus Pro, who had just come off the back of a strong Epicenter performance, and then beating also Hellraisers and Havu and Flash. And then, of course, they really took care of business at the ELEAGUE Boston Asian Minor, where they didn't really have any trouble at this tournament at all. I mean, they did drop one map to Tyloo in the upper bracket final, but other than that, they pretty much, you know, skated through that and took another first place. And so they really have been on the rise lately. And some of the biggest reasons for that is we've really seen Nifty developing as an in-game leader, probably assistance from Kasada in the coach position. And I think this has led to his individual fragging performances also becoming stronger, because maybe he has to direct less and do less micromanaging because they've had more time together, and he's been able to develop a balance between in-game leading and fragging. So it seems like you're starting to see his potential as an impactful opper become more consistent. He always showed flashes of it at certain events, but I feel like he's gotten a little bit more consistent in his fragging, and the team operates pretty well, it seems. Like, yeah, they tend to be a little bit more aggressive, tend to favor fast-paced play, but they definitely, you know, really kind of developed and become more diverse and just in general a better working team, and Nifty a better player because of it. Naf has developed into a true star player. I've also done a video on Naf developing into a star, so if you want to get more details on this, check out that video. But he's definitely coming to his own. He's also become, you know, more versatile, being able to have more impact on the game in different ways, not always having to be a peripheral player or a late round player or a clutcher, but also being able to have impact earlier in the round by being a part of the main attack group in certain situations. And then you've also seen JKS returning into better form. After a rough early part of 2017, he's been a lot more solid lately, and that's good to see, because I feel like JKS was always kind of considered a rock for this team in the past, and so to see him getting into better form is great. great. And then, of course, you always have a guy like Azza who can be really good within his role of being kind of an entry type player and being able to at least create openings for his team. And if he's on a heater, if he's having a great game, he definitely can put up big numbers even as well. And even Ustilo at times has kind of popped up and done his job and played his role properly. So if I'm to wrap up Renegades at this point, I actually, in my preliminary picked them to make it out. I think they will make it past this new challenger stage and be able to move into the new legend stage, or what was traditionally the group stage of previous majors. I really do think they have a solid chance. Like, this is the best chance Renegades has had in a very long time of making any type of noise at a major. This is certainly the best the team's ever been, and I think that their chances are pretty good to make it into the new legends phase. Now, to be fair, they're up against a really difficult field. You know, they do have to contend with the likes of Cloud9, you know, G2. This new Navi team looks like it might be dangerous. So they've only played one event, so they're a bit of a mystery box. You got to go up against a strong Mouse Sports team. Obviously, FaZe, one of the best teams in the world. So there's definitely at least like 5 pretty locked-in teams out of the 8 slots that are going to be available. But with those 3 slots that are sitting out there, obviously a team like Space Soldiers, a team like Envious, you know, those are teams that you may think to take 2 of the 3 spots, but then even then there's still 1 spot left open that I really think that, you know, a team like Renegades and Misfits are actually really fighting for against some of these other, you know, decent teams. So I definitely think that Renegades can make it. As far as will they make it past the new legend stage, could they make it to the new champion stage, could they actually make it into the top 8 of the tournament, I think that that's going to be a little bit too much right now. You know, I think when you think of some of the other teams in the field, I can't quite see them doing that, but I certainly think that they will make it to, you know, the top 16, and maybe depending on who they get matched up against, if they get you know, lucky and who they get matched up, maybe they could make it to top 8, but I certainly think top 16 is reasonable. Now moving on to Misfits. Now this is a team that, again, like Renegades, has seen a little bit of a rise up lately. Obviously made a lot of noise at the EPL Season 6 finals because of some really cool best of 1 kind of upset wins against North and NIP, and then being able to beat Energy as well to make it out of groups, and they 2-0'd Hellraisers, and then they went on to play SK, where they weren't very competitive, to be fair. They kind of got waxed in this, but they still wound up getting a top 4 finish because of their performance in the group stage and being able to take care of Hellraisers. And then at iBuyPower Masters, they did go out in groups. They did look pretty weak there, to be honest. But at the Americas Minor, they looked really good, actually beating Team Liquid in the best of 3. And this was before Team Liquid was having their roster issues that kind of culminated at iBuyPower Masters and then afterwards when Stanislav departed. So they were still considered a very strong team that was just coming off the back of some good stuff. And so being able to challenge Liquid here was really good. Asserted themselves above CLG, who was, of course, falling off, but still, you know, at different points in time, CLG was considered maybe like a better ranked team than Misfits, but Misfits overcame that, and they just looked really good as a team at this America's Minor. Also beat Rise Nation and Luminosity at this event, just to kind of add on to some of the other middle of the pack teams in the North American scenes. They were able to kind of topple over, obviously doing pretty decent online. I mean, they won that CyberPower Elite Series, having beat Renegades and Optic to do that, and then we're doing well in the online leagues. Or EPL, they weren't in ECS, weren't able to qualify. So this team, you know, went from a team whose only real success was at DreamHack Tours back in like May of, you know, 2017 to now really kind of actually getting some decent results and looking like a better team. And basically, some of the things you were kind of seeing was that Sean Gears was becoming more of a lurk or more of a supportive player, and this was maybe making some of his other players more comfortable. You know, you really did see Amanek and Devo Duvik coming into a lot better form, particularly Amanek. Like, he just seemed to have like a relevation at the Americas Minor. He was a monster there. He looked pretty good at some of these other tournaments also. So the fact that you're seeing Amanek putting up really good fragging power against the likes of a Shazam, who's always been kind of an underrated fragger as an opper and usually puts up numbers, and a guy like Sick, who's a very young player in America that represents some of these youth that are coming up in the scene. Of course, he's kind of been overshadowed by, you know, Twist, who was a teammate of his on TSM, and overshadowed by the likes of people like an ELEAGUE or like a Stewie2K or a Tarek or some of these other youth that are in Team Liquid and Cloud9. But he himself has also been kind of one of those prospects to keep an eye on. He started to perform pretty well also. He's always usually been a pretty good performer, but again, he kind of got overshadowed a little bit, maybe did drop a little bit of form, but it seems like lately he's been kind of getting back into better shape. And it just really feels like this team has had more time to develop and play as a team and learn from each other. Again, maybe the language barriers with Dominic and Nevadovic, some of that maybe is getting sorted out, maybe just having more time together, practicing more, learning how each other likes to play and how to play off of each other. You know, listening to interviews from Sean Gage, it just really feels like having better fine-tuned practice, the European boot camp they had before EPL, really just kind of helped the team gel a little bit better, and just they've always been pretty diverse tactically. I feel like Sean Gage has always been able to bring some cool executes and anti-stratting to the table, but they've also always been good at like the basics of a default. But it just seems like everything works better now. And so this team is another dangerous team that I think could potentially make it to the new Legend stage, perhaps be able to make it past this traditionally called major qualifier, but now this is part of the major. I think this team too could be in the top 16. Again, we kind of talked about when I was discussing Renegades, you know, teams like a Cloud9, a G2, a Navi, a Mouse Sports, a FaZe, you know, these seem kind of like locks. And then you have Envy and Space Holder sitting out there, which are other teams that you would think could do pretty good. But I think it's just like Renegades, Misfits does have a pretty solid chance to make top 16. Now, whether they can make it much further than that, I'm not really sure. I couldn't see this team being top 8, just like I couldn't really see Renegades being top 8. But, you know, you never know in the best of one situations who you get matched up against. If you get a really good matchup on a really good map, maybe you have a shot to pull an upset. But certainly, I think at the very least, Misfits could make top 16 and make it out this new challenger stage. And so now we will move on to Team Liquid. And Team Liquid, of course, is in a little bit of a tricky situation, right? I mean, they basically have been swapping back and forth between Zeus and Steel. Of course, they had to use Zeus at EPL. They're going to have to use Zeus at the Major. They already used Steel at IEM Oakland in ECS Season 4 finals. And they've really had rough results lately, honestly. You know, ever since they lost to Cloud9 in that semifinal match at iBuyPower Masters back in the middle of November, they haven't really scored a lot of map wins offline. I think if you look, they have 3. If you look at IEM Oakland, EPL, and ECS, they won 3 maps and they lost something like 10 maps. They went like 3 and 10, I think. And if you count the Cloud9 best of 3 at iBuyPower Masters, and that puts them, what, 4 and 12? So the offline results lately, they've kind of suffered from this roster instability, this not being able to solidify their 5 yet and be able to fully devote to one lineup and their preparations. And, you know, it certainly reflected in how they finished off the ECS and EPL finals, and the fact they didn't make it out of groups at IEM Oakland, the fact that they were already kind of in turmoil at iBuyPower Masters, and so kind of lost that best of 3 to Cloud9, though, you know, that wasn't that bad of a loss. And, you know, at the Americas Minor, you know, at ESL1 New York, at ESG, you know, Mykonos, like this team was looking really strong and was looking like one of the best teams in the world. You know, had a couple of second place finishes, top 4 finishes. Certainly seemed like this was the team to really keep an eye on. But unfortunately, just the situation they find themselves in now, it makes it very hard for me to be confident they can make top 16 in this tournament. When I think about the rest of the field they're up against, which I've already mentioned with Renegades and Misfits, when I think about Renegades and Misfits being in a better situation than Liquid, as well as, you know, a team like Cloud9 that's going to be, you know, already one of the current challengers in this new challenger stage, I just can't really gauge Liquid right now because, for one, I don't know how much practice they've put in with Zeus compared to how much practice put in with Steel. I've heard different reports. Like, I feel like I heard from some content that they were focusing on practicing with Zeus a lot, and that may have made them suffer with the Steel lineup. But then I heard Nitro in an interview say that they really weren't focusing on practicing with Zeus. They were really focused on practicing with Steel. So I've heard kind of conflicting reports about their preparation going into the major. And so I think they're just way too hard to gauge. I think there's still some chances for them to do well. I mean, if the talent they do have pops off, like if ELEAGUE and Twist are playing individually really amazing, and like JDM keeps his form up from the last tournament, yeah, certainly they could still be a little bit dangerous. And I think that Zeus is at least, you know, aware of the tactics since he's the coach. And so it shouldn't hurt too much from maybe a role perspective if you're just going to plug him into, like, you know, Steel or Stanislaw's old spots and let everyone else kind of play the same and kind of, you know, keep that familiarity there. And if individuals can pop off, they can still do great. But I personally think that given the situation, Renegades and Misfits actually probably have a better chance than Liquid to come into the top 16. I just think this is an unfortunate situation for Liquid given the roster rules and things that have been going on with them, and so I can't read too much into them, and I don't even want to judge much more than what I've said just because I think it's a tricky situation. So next up, we'll move to Cloud9, and this is the only team that's a current challenger from the NA region that didn't have to go to their minors and anything like that, but now they're pretty much on the same playing field as everyone else that I've already mentioned because they have to play through that to make it to the next stage of the major. And obviously, their recent results have been totally on point. I mean, yeah, they did go out in groups at ECS, but it was to FaZe, right? And they did, beat Liquid at IEM Oakland. They came top 4. Blitzing through the groups pretty well, including a win over SK, and obviously Astralis has had a rough lineup recently with Device not being able to play, but still took care of business in the groups, got a 2-1 against Gambit, and so certainly we're pretty strong at that IEM Oakland tournament. Again, FaZe has just been kind of their worst enemy in that regard. Then you had iBuyPower Masters, where they took first, beating Liquid, beating Renegades, taking care of business against the North American teams. Then they took first at DreamHack Denver, beating Mousesports, beating Big, pretty good results. And then, of course, ELEAGUE Premier. That was like where they really started to shine with that top 4 finish there. And this is back in October when they were able to beat NiP and Envy in the group stage, beat G2, go toe-to-toe with Astralis back when they were still in good form and they had Device, took a map off of them even, looked very competitive in that best-of-3, almost made it to the finals of ELEAGUE Premier, but did get beat by Astralis. And then prior to that, they also had the top 4 at ESL1 New York and the top 4 at Montreal. Again, New York just getting absolutely shut down by FaZe. DreamHack Montreal was a loss to North in the semifinals. So, honestly, outside of getting crushed by FaZe, they have shown the ability to be competitive against pretty much the rest of the field at this major. I think that's something that really needs to be highlighted. Like, yeah, sure, they lost a best-of-1 to Astralis at ECS while they were using a stand-in. Yeah, sure, they did have, a loss at IEM Oakland. Yeah, at ELEAGUE Premier, they did lose to Astralis in the best-of-3. But again, they've, beaten Na'Vi at times. Granted, it was the old Na'Vi lineup without Electronic, but they were able to beat Na'Vi at times. They've taken maps off of SK at times. They were able to beat G2 at ELEAGUE Premier. We haven't seen them up against the new Na'Vi lineup yet. We've seen them be able to beat Gambit before. So when you look at kind of the rest of the field, I mean, yeah, they only had the one head against North, but they lost. But some of the other Legends teams, they've beaten big in the final, right? I don't think they've played Fnatic yet. I can't remember if they've played VP with this current 5. If they did, it was kind of a bit ago, so it's not really fresh on my memory. But the point is that Cloud9, given their current form, given the talent that they have, given the fact that they've even been a bit more tactical at times, maybe some people would have expected, I still think their strength is the swarm and trade style that the old Optic used to have because of the fact that they have so many aggressively prone riflers in the lineup. But they certainly at times have shown more, complex fakes and executes and things like that. And it seems like they are kind of, trying to show up their map pool, though I think it still is a bit shallow. But I haven't talked about map pool a lot in this video simply because a lot of this is going to be best of ones, and so you're not going to have a very deep map pool up until you get to the actual playoff stage in a lot of different ways. So I think that this team, obviously Liquid had their 2 second-place finishes at majors, and so we have the gift of hindsight to look back and say, like, oh, this is, really NA's the best chance to do something at a major. But if we're talking about going into a major and not having the gift of hindsight and not having the gift of seeing kind of what's going on in the major so far as the major's progressing, this Cloud9 team probably has one of the best chances an NA team has ever had at making a deep run in a major. For one, they're one of the best teams NA has produced in history as far as the results that they've been able to get thus far. They have on paper one of the sickest lineups NA has produced thus far. It's been sometimes termed a dream team. Certainly there's some shortcomings on this team where, inexperienced in-game leaders on this team between Tarek and Stewie, not traditionally known as in-game leaders, so you do have to worry about leadership a little bit. Obviously, because they have so many aggressively prone riflers, sometimes I feel like a Stewie 2K or a Rush, depending on the map, does get stuck in maybe a T-side spot that they're not well known for, where they can't play at their optimal level because they're kind of having to play a peripheral. They're not used to having to play because on previous teams that were kind of known to be the big action creators, and now they're having to take a bit of a step back because of the lineup that they've put together. So I think that there are some flaws and some shortcomings that teams do have to face that could certainly impact them. But still, even with all those shortcomings, I think when you think about what they've done thus far, who they have on paper, and think of some of the situations they're up against. They're up against Astralis potentially not having their full 5. I've heard that they might have to play with the stand-in even still at this major. You know, I'm not even sure who it would be. I guess it would have to be Zonic, their coach. That would really set them back, I feel like. SK having to use a stand-in in Phelps. Maybe they're not going to be as strong. You know, if they can avoid FaZe, I feel like they have a good chance at making a deep run this major. That's just how I'll put it. Like, yeah, if they get stuck against FaZe in the opening best of 3 in the playoffs in round of 8, yeah, they probably go out in round of 8 because FaZe is just their kryptonite. They just shut down Cloud9 every time. They're like the perfect counter to Cloud9. They're everything Cloud9 is, but better, because they seem to have more consistency in their high skill level players. But I think outside of FaZe, Cloud9 can beat any other team at this tournament in a best of 3. They've proven it already at times. Not saying they definitely will, but I'm just saying that they've proven the ability to be competitive against the entire field at this tournament. The only team they've constantly struggled against is FaZe. Some of these teams they haven't really played up against a lot, so it's kind of hard to measure. But no, I think Cloud9 has a great chance to make a really deep run at this tournament, and as long as they can avoid FaZe, they could even go all the way to the final. You know, or maybe someone takes care of FaZe for them, and then they wind up playing, like, what if SK plays as FaZe, and then they beat FaZe, and then they play SK in a final or something? I don't think it's impossible that Cloud9 can win it. I'm not saying that they're a favorite to win the major or anything like that, but I'm certainly saying that they have a good chance to. I would say that they will at least make round of 8. They will get legend status, and I think they have a chance, depending on who they get matched up against, to make a pretty deep run. That's my prediction for Cloud9. We'll just have to see how it goes, though. And then finally, we're at the 2 teams that are already legends, the 2 teams from Brazil, 100 Thieves and SK. Now, 100 Thieves, I've already done a whole video on 100 Thieves, so I'm not going to go too into crazy detail with this. I'll just put a link down below so you can check out a detailed video. But essentially, this is their first event together. There's obviously a lot of drama surrounding them. They have been boot camping in Europe, but you do have to wonder a bit if you know, they're a little bit rusty, if they're a little bit out of shape. You know, what can they do? You know, for example, you have a guy like Bit, who has only really played within Brazil most of his career. Yeah, he did play in NA, you know, with Luminosity for, I think, maybe just a few months, actually, because he was playing in Brazil with, like, Keyed Stars and different things like that. A couple, like, Generation X and Team 1, actually. As well, mixed in stats. So he's played on a lot of different teams within Brazil, but he hasn't really played even within an NA region team to get a little bit more exposure, except for a few months. And so that's big. You know, he hasn't been exposed to international Counter-Strike, really. He's never played at the level he's about to play at the major. He's never in-game leaded at that level. That's not even really a word, but he's never IGL'd at this level of competition either. And so that's a big responsibility. Not only are you having to try to perform as a player at a level you never played at before within CSGO, but you're also having to lead a team. That's a lot of responsibility, and I do wonder how that's really going to pan out. I think that's going to be a big problem. FNX hasn't played since April or May, I think it was, when he was playing with Immortals at, you know, DreamHack Austin and different events like that. Prior to that, of course, has an extensive history with, you know, SK and Luminosity, very successful, so many top 4 finishes and titles, including 2 majors. You know, definitely has proven to be a really solid, stable peripheral player, support type player, great clutcher, definitely has a reputation for that. And his numbers were dropping off the last few events with SK, but, you know, maybe that could be attributed to just things that were going on within the team, with turmoil and whatnot. But still a very solid player, sure. And then you have KNG, who we didn't really know much about him until he joined Immortals, but he certainly proved himself to be a very good hybrid player with being able to op, being able to entry frag, and just be an all-around playmaker. Really rose from obscurity in that way. And then you have the twins, Lucas and Henny, who Lucas, I think, has been an underrated entry fragger at times. I think he does play the role pretty well. Certainly he's had some bad events, but generally he plays his role well and has had some big events in games at times. So I think within his role, he's fine. Then you have Henny, who's like the flashy but flaky player. Certainly was amazing all through his days in Tempo Storm. Started to have some really off times for Immortals, but still overall pretty good stats-wise. He's just kind of frustrating because you see him hit the hard shots and miss the easy ones, something that you hear people talk about now with Draken at NIP, of course. He can also hybrid, do some entrying as well, which is a little bit of an underrated perk about him. But again, there's obvious drama around them. You have to wonder if they're rusty. You have to wonder if Bit can lead at this level. You have to wonder what type of level of Counter-Strike they're going to be able to bring to this tournament. I think they're a huge mystery box. I think they're the hardest team to read at this tournament. They could certainly, you know, make top 8 again, but they could also really flop. I mean, they're going to be able to skip that initial stage of the tournament and not have to play until it's already top 16. But I just don't know what to expect from this team, man. I don't know if their attitudes are going to clash. They all seem to be kind of fiery characters. If that's going to be a problem, I couldn't really tell you. And last but not least, that's going to leave SK. And of course, SK has had a lot of success lately. Of course, I'm talking about the win at EPL, the win at Blast, pretty decent run at IM Oakland, obviously the one at Epicenter. Again, this is all with Bolts, though. So now I have to go back to the Phelps lineup. And the Phelps lineup did have their struggles before they finally did bring in Bolts. You know, obviously ELEAGUE Premier didn't go well, getting knocked out by Heroic. Obviously got knocked out by Liquid at ESL1 New York and ESG Mykonos, which was really tough on them. Then, of course, you have DreamHack Masters. They lost out to G2 and North. And then, of course, the last major, they got knocked out by Astralis in the round of 8. And then prior to that, though, a lot of success, I think, needs to be said, right? I mean, they won Cologne. They won ECS Season 3. They won DreamHack Open Summer. They won IEM Sydney. They won CS Summit. So this team did have several titles and top 4 finishes mixed in with maybe some of the bad that was kind of coming in towards the end when they weren't getting the results that they wanted. So I think Thorin actually did a really big video on the fact that SK could still win this major despite the fact they have to use Phelps. I think that's certainly true. I agree with most of the points he made in that video, and I would direct you to go look at that. I think when you think about SK coming into this major, they still have a sick amount of talent on this team, and Phelps can be part of that sick group of talent. Again, I think people just think because their last few tournaments together with Phelps went so poorly by their standards, I think it needs to be stressed because they were still getting some top 4s in those disappointing results. I think that because of that, people don't remember the fact that this team was super dangerous in the early and mid stages of 2017. Absolutely a phenomenal team. Yeah, it is true that they had a couple of handicaps that they were usually able to rely on when Phelps came in. For one, their map pool certainly shifted. You know, they weren't as good on train anymore, for example. They weren't even necessarily as good on overpass as they were. Overpass and trains come back to the forefront with Bolts, funny enough. You know, but they were becoming monsters on Cash, Cobblestone in particular. Also pretty damn good on Mirage. Like, they had some really strong matches. So the map pool did shift. That's true. But you could level that as a pro or a con, or you could just label it as kind of a neutral. They made an adjustment they needed to make to still have a strong enough map pool to compete. Yes, Fallen's individual level did fall off because he was having to play a little bit more of a backseat because Phelps and Fur were such big action creators that he couldn't be as much as one with an AWP as he had been in the past, and so his level did individually take a hit because of that, because he was trying to find a way to still op but be able to support this new style they were going to have to play with Phelps and Fur. Even Cold, to a degree, didn't get to do as much as he used to. He's always been known to be a very versatile player. When Phelps was on the team, he did have to take a backseat even himself. He couldn't be as versatile as he was in other times, right? Like, yeah, he's always been kind of a guy that can be considered a support in a sense in some of the positions that he plays, can be a little bit of a peripheral player at times. You know, may not be the biggest action creator on the team, but is always known to be really sick in like the chaos and mid to late round, and obviously a very good closer, very good clutcher in his own right. And so, yeah, he wasn't able to demonstrate his full range of abilities when Phelps on the team because he had to kind of take a back seat in early round situations a bit more. So yeah, there certainly were some handicaps, but on certain maps, the Fur-Phelps entry combo was baller. You know, particularly on a map like Cash or Mirage. You know, those are the two maps where those two together as in tandem were insane to watch play. So I think that it's a situation where there's still a lot of talent in SK. They still have a system in place. They still have people who can be, you know, comfortable in what they're going to be doing. Yeah, there's going to be a shift in map pool. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of tinkering because they've been used to playing with Bolts. But I think that this team is still very strong. Very strong. And they could even throw a curveball. What if they decide to come out and use Phelps in a completely different way than what you saw them using Phelps before in the past? You know, so even if you wanted to go back and scout SK back when they were using Phelps in the past, is it even going to be the same? Are they going to, they could throw a curveball. This is a team that time and time again has proven the ability to innovate and make adjustments through roster changes and come out with something new and really catch you off guard. And I think you have to think about that as well. Again, you can never bet against this team, not with all that they've accomplished with their players and how good everyone is right now. And I personally think that this team could easily win this major. Yeah, a team like FaZe, who gets to play with their full 5, might be able to finally best SK, but they've never been able to do it before in the past. And I really think that this team could easily win the major again there. I definitely think SK is going to retain legend status, and they definitely should make it to at least the semifinals. And I think they could win the whole thing and make the finals. So that's where I'm going to leave it at. I don't want to get too much into detail. This video is already 30 minutes long. Again, to just kind of review, I think that Renegades and Misfits have a good chance to make top 16, but probably won't make it further than that. If you want more detailed information about Renegades and Misfits, I have a whole separate video you can check out on that. When it comes to Team Liquid, I think that it's just too hard to gauge them because of their roster situation, but I wouldn't expect them to be able to make top 16. If they did somehow slide in the top 16, definitely not going to make top 8 in my opinion. Then we have Cloud9, a team that I think has a really good chance to make a deep run. One of the best chances NA's ever had to make a deep run in the major is in the form of Cloud9. 100 Thieves, similar to Liquid, a mystery box for me, very hard to gauge given that we have no data on them really. Certainly the player history and talent is there for them to be able to do something and make a bit of noise, but I wouldn't suspect them to make a deep run. And then SK to finish it off as a team that I absolutely suspect, just like Cloud9, has a great chance to make a deep run, and SK, of all these teams, probably has the best chance to win the whole thing, despite the fact that they're having to use Phelps. And again, other videos are out there about Renegades, Misfits, and 100 Thieves. If you want to learn more about those 3 teams in particular, and they'll be in the description below. If you enjoy this content, please follow, subscribe for more. Thanks so much. See you next time.